Welcome back to episode 2 of the Aligned Sovereignty 12-part series. What we're going to be discovering, or what we're going to be covering over, is breath and autonomic control. Because breath is one of the fastest ways to access unconscious regulation consciously. It really helps define the impact on how that has either in recovery or for healing. Most people assume that because they're alive, they're breathing properly, which is absolutely incorrect. We are bombarded by a number of different physiological stresses, and those physiological stresses are what impact our physiology. Because we're alive doesn't mean we're breathing properly. Modern breathing patterns are typically short and shallow. They're going to be met through our mouth as opposed to deeply through our nose, where we get into lower diaphragm and intercostal expansion. It's going to be chest dominant. This, over a period of time, has severe consequences because it's actually creating more stress, not just in our body, but in our entire system. One of the most misunderstood aspects is carbon dioxide. CO2 isn't just a waste gas. It actually helps regulate and repair. CO2 is required for oxygen to be released from the hemoglobin into tissues. A principle known as the Bohr effect, and I'm just going to cover the Bohr effect a little bit more in depth here. The Bohr effect is a physiological phenomenon where hemoglobin affinity for oxygen actually decreases in response to lower blood pH. So it increased acidity and higher carbon dioxide CO2 levels. Shift prompts the release of oxygen from hemoglobin in tissues that are metabolically active and producing CO2 and acid, ensuring oxygen is delivered where it is most needed. As you can see, that waste gas, or CO2 itself, or carbon dioxide, is actually really important, especially for releasing toxicity out of our system. When someone chronically overbreathes, whether that be shallow or whether it be gasping for air or not breathing deeply enough, CO2 tolerance drops, oxygen stays bound in the blood instead of it being delivered to the cells where it's most needed. What this does is it creates a paradox. So normal oxygen levels on paper, yet tissues are depleted and they're under-oxygenated. This has a massive impact on the cells. Cells that don't receive oxygen efficiently, they don't produce energy well. They definitely aren't going to detox effectively, and the repair tissue is inefficient. So how this would show up for healing, it actually slows recovery. When we're talking about, say, high performers, whether they're athletes or whether they're entrepreneurs, what that's actually doing is reducing endurance, stamina, their focus, and their resilience. It actually impairs their recovery, and so they won't recover as fast to be able to go and perform at that high level. Let's get into the aspects of the diaphragm, because the diaphragm isn't just a breathing muscle. It is technically a pressure regulator. So the pressure below and the pressure above. And what it's actually doing is it's a pump mechanism. And every time we breathe in and the diaphragm comes up, it's now pushing pressure into the upper aspects, so into our lungs, up into our heart. And then as we breathe out, it's relaxing, but it's also pressurizing and creating a muscle fluctuation for all of our organs. And this is really important to get into diaphragmatic breathing. And we do that simply through breathing through our nose and getting down into the lower parts, into our belly, so we can actually get expansion properly, and then we can get intercostal expansion through our ribs, 360 degrees, so we're getting a beautiful pumping and releasing. What happens with that is it actually helps support the vagus nerve, because we're actually getting down deep into where we've got more nerve endings anywhere in our body, around the solar plexus region of our body, where we've got all of these beautiful nerves that come in for our organs. Each full diaphragmatic breath actually activates and mobilizes the liver and the intestines. This is what helps with gut motility as well as peristalsis, which is the muscle wave-like contraction that gets all of the broken down matter of our food to be processed so that it can come through and eliminated through our stooling. It stimulates the vagus nerve, like I was just sharing before, and also it assists with venous and lymphatic return. So it's also helping with the lymphatic pumping, and the lymphatic system is something that we'll cover extensively later down the track. What it also is going to do is also going to contribute to spinal stability, and it's going to help with the information moving back up through our central nervous system from our peripheral nervous system. When breathing is shallow, efficiency is technically lost, and we're not actually getting activation through the other parts of our body that depend on good diaphragmatic breathing. This is why dysfunctional breathing correlates to digestive dysfunction, lower back pain, and poor recovery. High performers will tend to try and mitigate this and solve these issues through training more. It becomes a bottleneck, and what it actually is respiratory mechanics, essentially. This also has a big emphasis around not just athletes or entrepreneurs, but it also has a big impact on just your regular mother, father, or 9-to-5 worker. And they don't realize that their breathing is actually the basis of a lot of their dysfunction in what's taking place within their body, in their systemic issues, essentially. This is why applied breathing techniques that I use within my systems, as well as people that I've been taught by, from likes of Dan Brule, Paul Chek, Jan Carton, they have always emphasized the importance of breathing mechanics. Paul Chek has got a beautiful system where it actually is based around the totem pole, and at the very top of that totem pole is our thoughts and how we associate to those beliefs. The second part of that is breathing and respiration. And so I've realistically adopted this, and it's part of the important ways in which I work and mitigate a lot of physiological aspects with my clients, as well as taking people through these detoxes where we get into proper breathing mechanics to help deload the system while their body can then release toxicity and pathogens. The beautiful thing with Dan Brule, he emphasizes this extensively, and what it actually does, it creates rhythm, as well as, when we get into the mechanics, the importance of nasal breathing. 90% of the time we should be breathing through our nose. If we're breathing through our mouth, we should be using the mouth to be an activator to simply get a different response in our system. And there's nothing wrong with, say, beautiful breaths like Sufi breath or Tomo that have kind of like paved the way, essentially. They're powerful, and they actually get deep into systemic issues and activate and get release of trauma and other associated implications in our system. So slow nasal breathing, roughly between 5 to 6 breaths per minute, has been shown to improve HRV. Whenever we extend the breath longer on the exhale, what that does is it stimulates the vagus nerve and brings our cortisol levels down. It stimulates HRV, or heart rate variability, and brings us back into a calm parasympathetic state. So HRV is just not a wellness trend. It's actually a measure of adaptability. And adaptability is, in my opinion, one of the most important facets in our health, or just in our life in general. Being able to be adaptable to change is always one of the most powerful aspects that we can learn to create in our lives. So healing and performance both require the same thing: the ability to shift out of stress and into repair. Whether you're a stay-at-home mum, or a 9-to-5 working woman, or a boss entrepreneur, a stay-at-home dad, or a dad that's working 9-to-5 on the grind, or a high-performing entrepreneur or an athlete, it's still the same thing. We want to be able to deload the stress in our system and begin to activate repair at the cellular level. And this is where breathing is not just about calming down. It's actually about restoring biological efficiency in our system. And having an efficient system that actually then creates faster healing, we can perform longer, and we can recover faster, and we won't have breakdown as much as what we would if we aren't using these tools, so to speak, even though they're natural, to help mitigate a lot of these issues, whether that be disease, illness, dysfunction, injury. That's the wrap on episode 2. I look forward to having you in the next episode. Thanks for being here. I'm Vaughan Sovereign, and this is Aligned Sovereignty.